This is an interview I did with Tom Webster, clearly one of the most, maybe the most respected researcher in podcasting, about his newest project, the Podcast Atlas. Some big names backing this report. 5,000 listeners surveyed, NPR, SiriusXM were part of it. We're not covering the whole report today. You can find that through Sounds Profitable. But I really wanted to pin Tom down on what the survey results mean for branded podcasts, organizations that have podcasts to deepen trust in the brand itself, not necessarily to sell things and not necessarily to be Joe Rogan. The branded podcast that put a lot of pride into their shows. Do the numbers mean the same thing to them? Or are there some nuances to that? And yeah, there are. Here's my interview with Tom. Tom Webster, how are you?
I'm awesome, Doug. How are you?
I'm good. Finally, summer in Canada's Rocky Mountains, where I'm at. I know in Boston you've had it for quite some time, so I'm always jealous.
We've had a World Cup summer as well.
You have,
which has been a real hoot for we New Englanders.
Extremely well done. And Scotland will talk about Boston forever and ever.
And we'll talk about Scotland forever and ever. I think.
Will.
Yeah, hey, they were incredible.
5,000 people surveyed in through Signal Hill Insights, backed by American Public Media, ESPN Podcast, BetterHelp, SiriusXM, and NPR. This is some serious research. I think I've heard you say this is one of your proudest pieces, something to that effect. And for me, my read was that you're saying the multi-channel universe is here. Those who think of their show as a show really needs to start thinking about the other tentacles, and that the audio podcast is one thing, but the video is another, social media channels, your newsletter, all of this stuff. What do you say to someone who has an audio podcast and where all this is going?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think it's a continuation of almost all the work that I've done for 30 years. And that is everything has to be audience-centric and audience-focused. And if you're producing an audio podcast and that is it, that is the sum total, I'm not going to dissuade you from that. Make your art. But the audience today is not drawing silos. The audience doesn't live in silos. Like today, I'm Video Bob or Audio Janet. They like a show, they like creators, and the more surfaces that creator can present themselves to on and touch them on, the greater the chances of success. And I think that's indisputable at this point.
Yeah. And you talk about listening to your audience. I mean, you say that a number of times in your book that's still available on Amazon and other sources.
Well spotted, Doug Downs. Thank you.
The audience is listening. And there was one excerpt that I went through. I'd show you on camera. It's all highlighted in yellow and folded and all that. So the question that most people reading the book would say, how do I get more listeners? And what you're saying is the problem should be how to make a podcast that more people want. And that's at the heart of all of this.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I wrote that book, and I think it's an evergreen book because I was frustrated by a lot of the advice that people would get about growing their audience that basically reduced to tactical suggestions about promotion. And ultimately, if you are spending a lot of time promoting a bad show, that's essentially like spending a lot of time on a grand opening for a department store when the shelves are dusty and bare. Someone may visit it, but they may never come back. And I just think we need to spend a whole lot more time improving our shows and being honest about that, because what we're seeing today, Doug, with podcasting, so much more of a mainstream consumption behavior with mainstream Americans. I'll tell you something about mainstream America and mainstream Canada. They have high standards. They're used to high concept, well-produced streaming television. They're not used to things that don't have that kind of final polish of quality, right? So to me, it's not that they have low attention spans or anything like that. It's that they have really high standards. And so things are getting more and more difficult, I think. But the best defense you have against that, and the best defense you have against AI generated content and everything else, is to spend 90% of your time really polishing your show, making sure the content is there, stripping it down of everything that is not necessary to drive the arc forward. And and just respect people's time and understand that they have very high standards now.
Most of the podcasts that we work with are brands, so branded podcasts, and that's just a stream of the much bigger, broader podcast industry. They tend not to run ads. Their podcast has a narrative purpose, so there's native ad if you want. They're trying to reinforce their brand. If it's a show done well, done through creating a good show, the conversion for them isn't about necessarily someone hearing a spot and buying on the spot. It's someone finishing an episode, registering for a webinar, signing up for a masterclass, downloading a white paper, leading them to the place where a sale might be made. The Podcast Atlas shows audio ads convert at 10%. Audio, 10%. Video, 15%. That really stood out to me, by the way. Does that same conversion data apply when there is no ad in the episode? I think of it as a call to action, the CTA.
Yeah.
Do the CTAs still work at 10% for audio and 15% for video?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because the thing that I would say for not only for branded podcasts, like the kind that you work on and we're talking about, but also really for any kind of podcast that runs advertising, that discrepancy between audio and video is a discrepancy of recall of where I made the transaction. And where you make the transaction is likely to be influenced by, are there transactional surfaces in that channel, right? And there are a lot more transactional surfaces in YouTube. There are places to click and like and subscribe. And there are things for you to click on that will lead to a purchase, that will lead to some kind of conversion, however you're going to track on it. An audio file doesn't have those surfaces, but it doesn't mean that it is not equally impactful. And in fact, in some cases, it can be more so. And in the case of branded content, kind of native content, as you say correctly, a lot of times it's not for someone to buy a mattress. In some cases, the goal of a company in producing a branded podcast might be just to change someone's story about what a brand stands for. It might be to change hearts and minds. And that's the kind of thing that a transactional surface is not going to tell you. It's not rocket surgery. You can find it out with surveys. You can find it out with all kinds of customer feedback tools. And that's what branded podcasts are exceptional at. And so I wouldn't get too hung up on that 10% versus 15%, because if you're listening to an audio podcast, what can you click on? So some of that number, and I wrote an article about this a couple of weeks ago, is impacted by the fact that there are just simply more transactional surfaces in video.
And do the numbers apply? Podcasting is very top heavy. Such a strong percentage of listening or viewing happens with the big Stephen Bartlett, Joe Rogan, Mel Robbins, Brene Brown, Amy Porterfield. Do the numbers convert the same when you're talking about the podcast that gets 1,000 downloads per episode? Sorry, downloads, listens, plays, whatever, per episode, or even 100 or even 50? Do the numbers still work?
I don't know about 50, but at 500, 1,000, let's say, you have likely attracted an audience beyond your immediate friends and family. Let's call 50 and below immediate friends and family, and they have other reasons to listen to you. But if you've broken through that, then you have appealed to an audience that is interested in your topic. And what we know from that is that those smaller shows convert better, and they convert better because their advertisers are typically much more focused on the niche, or as the French would say, niche, that podcast is actually focusing on, right? If you have a podcast about knitting or board gaming or miniatures painting or some of the other things that I've listened to over the course of my long career in podcasting, you're not getting that anywhere else. You're very passionate and focused on that show. You love that the hosts do it, and they are likely doing host-read ads for things extremely relevant to the content and not just sort of general consumer packaged goods. So net, conversions are far better on those shows.
The riches are in the niches, as they say.
The riches are in the niches. Yeah. Thank you for correcting my pronunciation.
The Atlas, and I love it, and the companion discovery research that your team put out, both point to clips and social media as one of, or perhaps the leading entry point into a show ahead of personal recommendations. If I could, devil's advocate here,
Yep.
Organic reach to a creator's own audience on social media has been declining across every channel for close to a decade. I'm not saying we're not on social media. My
Yep.
goodness, we are 2.5 hours a day, scroll, 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 scroll. But if I posted something in 2020 and I post something in 2026, just all the math being the same, I'm reaching fewer people in 2026. Yep. That's how organic. And engagements, how many likes, how many reposts, how many comments. Engagement is down with the exception of TikTok. So when I see that social is the leading entryway, there's this little tiny 1 watt LED bulb in my head that goes off and says, I'm not sure about this. And I still like word of mouth. I still like Tom says, hey, Doug, go listen to Brian's podcast.
Yeah. And I'm going to give you the statistician's answer to this. When you're talking about what converts people, there's a numerator and a denominator. And in word of mouth, there's no question that fraction is the highest, right? Like that comparison, that conversion ratio is super high. But how many people do you know? Dunbar's number, which is a noted social construct, says we can maintain about 150 relationships. So, is it X out of 150 that your word of mouth can convert? And the conversion on social, conversion on clips, far, far lower, but the denominator is much higher. And that's the thing. And if I could put this in a sort of statistically easy way to think about it, at one point, let's say that if you spent a dollar, 100 pennies, a loonie on social media, and it used to give you back 2, right? If I told you that today, as you note, as those things have declined, if you spent $1 and it gave you back $1.40, would you stop spending the dollar?
No,
or would you keep making 40 cents on the dollar?
Exactly.
You would still keep doing that. And so, ultimately, is the conversion percentage lower and the worst of all of it? Absolutely. But you can't access that number of people anywhere else. And that's just sheer reach. So it does something different. It does something in concert. And it doesn't do something in place of word of mouth. It is a supplement. And you just need all of those things firing. So even though conversion is low, you can't get that kind of reach anywhere else unless you have more friends than I do, which a lot of people do.
And if I have $1.40, I might have an American dollar. So that really works out.
Oh, absolutely. As a frequent visitor to Canada, I'm well aware of that ratio.
It's wonderful for you right now.
It is.
These clips, how important is it? They all kind of look the same to me now. And I'm not really attracted to the Hollywood style, flashy, graphic, flashy Getty image, that kind of crap.
Yeah.
What works for you?
Well, what's going to work for you is what you think, or can, or whether you figure this out or you just take a good guess. The people who are likely listening to your podcast or watching your podcast, what are the kinds of things that they are going to linger on TikTok? What are the things that they're going to thumb up on TikTok? And for you and for many others, it's probably not going to be an AI voice going, here are 5 things I learned, or here's 10 things I ate when I was in Vancouver. Like that stuff isn't going to do it. But if you have a niche podcast, someone who continually lingers on content on that topic, or hits a thumb up on content about that topic, a much better chance of coming up across a clip of yours. And I think as long as you think of a clip as something that fully pays off in that space, it's not an unfinished sentence. It inhabits whatever short space that is as a complete sentence. Then I think you have a chance of people using that as a bridge to jump off and discover you. Are the conversions lower, as we talked about? Yes. But it's your best chance of getting out of your little bubble.
And the Atlas is clearly part of a series. I know you've already written a follow-up on what's to add. What's the question that the 5,000 person plus survey raised that you couldn't answer yet? Where does the Atlas go from here?
One thing about surveys is, surveys are studies of perception, and they're what people think now. And
Mm.
I'm very careful, especially as someone who is a trained survey researcher and have done this for a long time, not to overreact to hypotheticals. I try to keep hypotheticals out of my surveys whenever I can, because people don't think that way. And the one thing that to me is sort of unfinished, it is not a complete sentence to use that terminology again, is how people are going to react to AI generated content as AI continues to get better and as AI continues to inculcate itself into our society as just, an everyday tool like the fax machine used to be. I think there's a hue and cry amongst creators that are feeling threatened, and I thoroughly understand that, and I'm not on the side of the robots. But I also think that you know, I don't know what TV shows you're a fan of, Doug, but if I told somebody who had answered on a survey, I'm against AI generated content. If I gave them another question that said, if you could push a button and get a second season of Firefly, or if you could push a button and get the last season of Game of Thrones, but good, would you push that button? I think some people would push that button.
So I was driving the other night. It was about midnight. I had to pick up my kid at the airport. He was landing late, and I flipping through for podcasts, and I landed on one about the history of Nizhny Novgorod, east of Moscow. I have no idea why it interested me, but the male and female co-hosts, they had some good banter, and it was interesting stuff. And at one point, about 5 minutes in, I was really enjoying it. About 5 minutes in, I started thinking to myself, boy, these two, they have some amazing chemistry. They're like practically finishing each other's sentences. And then it dawned on me. And at that point, I turned it off, because then I realized I didn't like it. I liked it until I was aware that it was AI. And I wonder if that's the path we're heading down.
I do. I mean, I think that is a perception that is going to change over time. I think it's just going to become more and more ubiquitous. And those barriers that people have, as I said, some people, for creators, it's an existential question, and those barriers are real and they are visceral. For the general public, some of those barriers are real. Some of those barriers are aspirational or performative. And, it's going to come down to the quality of the content. And, I'm sure you and many of the people listening to or watching this remember the AI videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti, right? And those were like, what, 3 or 4 years ago? It doesn't take long. These things are moving very, very quickly, and you're not going to catch me coming down with some definitive statement about what people will or will not accept or tolerate, because that is such a moving target.
It's such a blessing to talk to Tom Webster today. Maybe 10 years in the future, we'll be just as happy to talk to Tom Webster, the bot, and get
you may already be talking to Tom Webster, the bot. I'm very up on all of this, Doug. So
you're 2 coffees in. There's no way. I appreciate your time today, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Really enjoyed it.